Radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company here on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. And as always, we've plenty coming up. Is bold welfare reform on the cards ahead of the next general election? Are students losing out on university strikes? And what about the weather? We do love to talk about it, don't we? As the cold returns and the wet gets wetter. But first, let's bring you right up to date, including some of that, with all of the day's news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. Good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Police are urging witnesses to come forward after 6 people were shot in a drive-by shooting in North London yesterday. A 7-year-old girl remains in hospital in a stable but life-threatening condition. 4 women and a 12-year-old girl were treated in hospital with a 48-year-old suffering life-changing injuries. The suspects are believed to have used a shotgun outside a funeral in Euston. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, who's MP for the constituency, says his thoughts are with the victims. Superintendent Jack Rowlands described the incident as shocking.
We believe the suspects discharged a shotgun from a moving vehicle, which was a black Toyota CHR. We want to hear from anyone who witnessed the incident or has information about it.
At least 68 people have died following a plane crash in Nepal, the country's worst aviation disaster in 30 years. 72 people were on board the Yeti Airlines flight, which crashed in Pokhara during clear skies. The airline has cancelled all regular flights. Local television showed thick smoke billowing from the crash sites as hundreds of rescue workers scoured the hillside. Those on board included passengers from India, Ireland, Australia and France. The Health Secretary has criticised the GMB union over what he calls a lack of patient and public safety during recent ambulance strikes. Steve Barclay wrote to the union saying voluntary arrangements which were put in place were not enough. He wants minimum service levels to be set in law. It comes as anti-strike legislation is due to be debated by MPs on Monday. Last week, the GMB published an open letter saying ambulance staff felt demonised by the government. Well, staying with health, and Sir Keir Starmer is calling for an overhaul of the NHS, saying it must reform or it will die. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he says a future Labour government would turn GPs into direct NHS employees rather than allow them to run their own practices. He's also announcing plans to allow some patients, such as those with back pain, to self-refer to specialists.
We'll double the number of medical students using money from abolishing the non-dom status for the super rich. But also we need to look at the way GPs operate and see whether we can't make changes there. Things which will actually preserve the NHS going forward. At the moment, what the government's doing is really just presiding over managed decline, and that I will not accept. Of course, there will be, challenges whenever you reform something, but frankly, if you don't reform the NHS, then I fear it will die.
The Prime Minister is asking government ministers to help persuade global allies to give more support to Ukraine and help break the stalemate with Russia. It comes after Rishi Sunak announced the UK would be sending 14 tanks to Kyiv. With the first anniversary of the war approaching, Mr Sunak is stressing the need for an international strategy. Former Major General Chip Chapman was head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. He told us Russia isn't backing down.
So it's really this shift in the red lines which will probably lead to other countries in the next 2 weeks also giving armour to the Ukrainians, which gives them this idea of a winning faster strategy in 2023. Of course, the enemy on the other side gets a vote in that, and it looks like the Russians are going to mobilise another 500,000 men this year on top of the 300,000 they mobilised in October. So there's a lot of hard fighting to come yet.
Well, Russia launched a major missile attack on Ukraine overnight, striking vital energy facilities across the country and destroying an apartment building. Officials say at least 21 people have been killed and 40 are still unaccounted for. Ukrainian authorities say the coming days will be difficult with threats to the supply of electricity, water and heating during the height of winter. Back here, and the UK is facing more than 100 flood warnings, with cold and wet conditions set to continue well into the next week. The Environment Agency has issued 192 flood alerts, whilst yellow warnings for ice are in place for much of Scotland and the northwest and the northeast of England. The Met Office is also warning that a few centimetres of snow are likely at low levels. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get straight back to Alastair.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. And a very good afternoon to all of you. Now, the general election may be still over a year away, but some of the policy areas that may just decide it are clearly emerging. And I think it's going to be a whole lot more exciting than some of us feared for quite a while, as I was just saying to Michael Portillo, if you were kind enough to be watching. They are genuinely interesting areas. Yesterday we talked about the economy, which of course is always a feature, is certainly crucial, but is in play as well, as in the opinion polls, Labour's credibility on the economy inches up and inches up. It's always crucial, but it may not just be the only determinant. Yesterday, we looked at healthcare in some detail, with Rishi Sunak demanding bold and radical measures and duly getting them, not least in bulk purchase of spare capacity in the care sector, which the care sector welcomed, but said they also need some fresh radical thinking on what the care packages would be for the people that they happily will give accommodation to at a reasonable price. So there we are. All of that is in play and we've discussed it. So today we're going to look at an aspect of welfare that is also attracting a great deal of attention. With a profound shortage of workers right across the economy in many, many industries, are there clever ways to tempt some of those who are not working back into the labour market? It may be because they're long-term ill, or it may be that, as it were, they've taken early retirement. If we need workers, what can we do to try and get those people back in employment, paying taxes, paying national insurance? Now, just a few days ago, Labour's Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, unveiled plans to encourage older workers and those with long-term medical conditions back into work. And Sir Keir Starmer writes, as you just heard from Ray, in today's Sunday Telegraph that the National Health Service itself is not a sacred cow, and that he will slash the nonsense of bureaucracy in the NHS, that nothing is off the agenda. Now, that might be said of benefits and welfare too, might it not? Let's have a look profoundly at how that operates. It really does seem to us that we might just get some fresh ideas ahead of that general election. And we would also very much like to know what yours are. What would you do if you were given the chance to reform both the NHS and, more importantly today, the entire welfare system? Do let me know. Now, in that speech, let me go back to John Ashworth, he promised to improve support for those who've recently left employment. More flexibility over fitness to work tests could help those who are on sickness benefits to find work. Government says that it is also itself increasing employment support for the over 50s. So a proper debate is clearly there to be had. Both Labour and the Conservatives seem to think that the fitness to work tests are pretty arduous and not exclusively helpful. From the days of Ian Duncan Smith, the Conservatives' main mantra is to make work pay and perhaps to make getting into work even easier. Some choose, as I said a moment ago, to bail out and, in effect, take early retirement. Entirely up to them. But what about those who do want to work? Why do we erect barriers occasionally and make it more difficult for them to do it? Others are deemed long-term sick, simply not fit to work. It is how the second group can better get helped that is really interesting, and Labour, in my view, seem to be making the running. Measures as radical as even letting those people keep some of the benefits that they get if they do get a job and become taxpayers and national insurance payers once again are clearly very contentious. I'll be talking to an expert in disability benefits about that in just a moment, plus Labour and the radical Institute of Economic Affairs for their thoughts. Now, the influential Spectator magazine said recently that welfare and work are clearly in play ahead of the general election, not least because the benefits bill is soaring and not to any great effect, they argued. Historically, I think it's fair to say that Labour have seen benefits as a way to simply help the poorest in society. With John Ashworth, they now seem to want to look at ways of what the economy needs and what we can do to help those who may be poor, partly because they simply don't have a job, i.e., can we get them back into work and give taxpayers more benefit for the money that they pour in to the welfare system. So fundamentally revisiting universal credit seems to have slipped out of favour with Labour. Now, higher tax-free allowances used to be the Conservatives' main tool to help the really poorest. Now they too want better ways of encouraging people back to work, not just chucking benefit at them. As I said right at the top, we'd love to hear from you. You've already started that process, and some of you are pretty radical, as always, which is delighted. And I'll be sharing the best thoughts with you as the programme unfolds throughout the afternoon. Send in your thoughts to @GBViews, @GBNews, or via any of our social media outlets, including Twitter, either @GBNews or me, or Facebook. Do get in touch with your thoughts on that, or indeed on any other subject. Now, as I said, I'm delighted to be joined now by a disability benefits expert, and that is the CEO of Disability Direct, Dr. Amu Raju. What both parties are saying now must be music to your ears, Doctor, i.e. not just saying, oh, poor souls, there they are, it's all terribly complicated, what have you. But no, let's actually look profoundly and fundamentally at how we do these assessments and how we help those who perhaps are on long-term disability benefit but want to get back. A very good friend of mine who was a thalidomide guy said the big thing about us is not that we are disabled, but we are able in different ways.
Totally agree. And forgive me, Alastair, for not getting too excited about political parties talking about benefits reform. I've been here in my job for nearly 30 years, and I've seen this story unfold a number of times. For me, the starting point needs to be revisited. I was involved many years ago in a piece of work done by Scope, the big national charity, which looked at the extra costs of disabled people. And they decided after working with many disabled people throughout the whole country, that disabled people were already £500+ per month worse off just trying to live independently. So to think about welfare rights reform, it's not just about work capability tests or getting people into work. It's about for a start, there's a pay gap. Disabled people are statistically £3,500 a year underpaid compared to their non-disabled peers. The wider story needs to be looked at. Carers of disabled people are getting paid less than £2 an hour when you look at carers. So there's a whole piece of work to be done.
Well,
before we start looking at
we've begun that process, and hurrah as well for John Ashworth to have started that as well. But just in the middle of that answer, we were looking at a job centre, and we've had several emails in from GB News viewers and listeners saying the whole process of assessing whether or not one is fit for work is overcomplicated. There's repetition within it. You have to very often go through the same tests for different questions. So are you basically saying that is a system that of itself is not fit for purpose and we could change it? Forget about the levels of money, support for carers at the moment, just for a moment. But the actual assessment process, that needs to be torn up and start again.
Absolutely. It's very binary. You are either fit for work or you're not fit for work. If you speak to a lot of disabled people's organisations across the country, they'll be suggesting the use of common sense and the social model of disability. Instead of saying, looking at the impairment, you should look at what is the barrier to you getting employment. What is it that you need to have in place for you to work successfully and then retain that employment? And I say the assessment is too binary. It's black or white, and there's no grey area to look at.
One of the reasons why it's binary, and both sides say this, and it's a tricky one, is simply that if you are in government or running the system, you can't just chuck money at a problem willy-nilly without asking fairly fundamental questions. So if disability benefit, long-term unemployment benefit, is being paid for by the taxpayer is going to want to know that it is a reasonable, fair and transparent assessment, that it's not just money for old rope.
Yeah, I do agree. The taxpayer's got a very, genuine interest in how that money's spent, but common sense needs to be applied. The amount of disabled people who are refused for universal credit and the disability premium simply because of not getting quite to that mark, which would have given them that entitlement. And that a lot of that is because, back to what we said earlier, the assessment is too binary. Some common sense needs to be applied in that assessment, and it should be transparent. I'm not denying that argument at all, but I say it's about applying some common sense, which we seem to have. Everything's gone computerized. It's either a yes or a no answer. There's no kind of consideration of the wider picture in each answer.
It's just intellectually lazy, that, isn't it, as well? I mean, are you, having read everything that Ashworth said, and also Ian Duncan-Smith was on Camilla Tominey's programme earlier on saying we do need some profound thinking, do you genuinely believe that minds at the top of both of the big parties, there are other parties out there as well, of course, are genuinely open on this subject ahead of the general election, and that welfare and disability and benefits may be in play in a proper way for the first time for quite some time?
I hope so, but the cynic in me is not getting too excited. If they are genuinely open to that conversation, then I would suggest that they get in touch with organisations like mine, and there's not just mine, there's many like mine across the country. Not just talk to the big national charities, talk to the user-led disabled people's organisations across the country, which will give you real-life examples of how the current benefit system isn't working.
I think that's a very generous and, if I may say so, very wise invitation to thinkers at the top of both parties. And I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Amu Raju, Dr. Raju is the CEO of Disability Direct. And if you are at the top of the Labour Party or the Conservative Party or the Liberal Democrats or Reform UK or any party, I'll repeat it, Dr. Amu Raju, CEO, Disability Direct. Get in touch. He'll tell you what you need to do, why it shouldn't be by irony, why it can work for taxpayers as well as for people who have long-term illness and disability. Thank you very much, Amo. Great to talk to you. Keep in touch. Thank you very much indeed. Now, listening to that, I hope, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Christopher Snowdon. Christopher's an old friend. He's the head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Surely, Christopher, for too many, and we're getting this already from our emails and from our social media field, many taxpayers out there reckon that benefits have become simply a lifestyle choice for people, and many are arguing that that focus that the Conservative Party used to have in the days of Peter Lilly's little list has completely gone off the boil. Do you see some movement in the undergrowth now from both Labour and the Conservatives on genuine welfare reform?
Well, I think people have always had exactly that concern. The benefit system is being abused, and of course it will be to some extent. It's very difficult to see exactly to what extent it's been abused, because this is obviously not something people hold their hands up to. But I mean, if you look at the basic statistics, the aggregate statistics, you see that the unemployment rate is relatively low. I mean, really quite low in terms of what we've come to expect over the last 50 or 60 years. There has been a rise in economic inactivity over the course of the pandemic, but still economic activity is actually lower than it was in 2010. I think the interesting thing to look at is, why have we seen this rise in economic activity among the over 50s, people of working age over 50? If they just want to take early retirement, then I don't think that's anybody else's business. But if for some reason they feel they can't get back into the workplace, then that is cause for concern. And the other thing is the big rise amongst people who are economically activity who are long-term sick, and there is some talk of this being long COVID or other side effects from COVID. And I mean, it's a fairly lame answer because I haven't got some radical policy suggestion, but I do think we need more research in both those areas, and particularly the long COVID issue, because that's obviously a healthcare issue rather than a welfare reform issue.
Absolutely. And as I said, I don't know whether you were able to hear him or not, but my first guest was saying that top of his list to answer that very question that you've just put, putting it bluntly, is simply a more intelligent assessment method that doesn't simply say, oh, are you really long time ill, whether it be long COVID or whatever it might be, but how can we match your appetite for getting back to work and increasing economic activity with whatever challenges you face. So an open mind there on even the assessment basis. I read, I think it's in the Telegraph this morning, an interesting piece about one of the Tory pressure groups that I don't think I'd heard of before, called Bright Blue, and they are suggesting that the Conservative Party has coasted on welfare reform and that Labour seem awake to that, and that Starmer's added to it with his piece in the Telegraph as well, as Ray and I were just talking about a moment ago, that the NHS needs to reform or die, and that nothing is off the table. I mean, you could make that same argument that the welfare system needs to reform, or taxpayers are just going to get bored to death with it and be unwilling to keep shoveling money after shoveling money without some profound thinking. Do you reckon it will be a big issue at the election?
I think it's always there or thereabouts, isn't it, come election time? And as I say, people do get concerned about abuse of the benefit system. We have had significant reform, of course, in this area over the course of the last 5 to 10 years with the universal credit. Now, the universal credit, in my opinion of a lot of people, actually, even Labour don't want to get rid of it anymore, is a good idea in theory. The idea that you simplify things, you stop it being 6 or 7 different types of benefit, and you make it one, is a good idea. But the rollout of it was botched. botched. And there are still concerns that it's unclear for some people, that some people are not getting the money they should do. This is why you've got more people going to food banks. And you've also got concern from other people who say, well, it's too generous. You have a sort of a poverty trap, or the marginal returns for going to work are just not worth it. And this is always the issue with welfare. It's all about incentives. Bright Blue are talking today about having a minimum income. Now, there's fairly obvious problems with giving people a minimum income as a human right. I'm talking a significant income rather than unemployment benefit, and that is that it might disincentivize people to work. If they don't have to prove that they're looking for work, then perhaps they won't. And it's also incredibly expensive. So that's one issue with that. With universal credit, I think again we need more research, I have to say, on universal credit. Is it the case, for example, that because you're giving people a lump sum, as it were, that people who are not very good at budgeting end up out of pocket by within a few weeks? Now, my personal view is that you should really just trust people to be sensible and responsible. You give them the money, and then they spend, for example, their housing costs out of that, rather than just pay for the housing. But we need to be realistic about this and look at the actual consequences. If it is the case that universal credit is not working for people who can't budget, maybe we need to look at a different system. But my point is, we have had a lot of welfare reform. Nobody now wants to get rid of universal credit. It would be a huge upheaval to do so. But I think we should review it and at least see how we can fine-tune it.
Christopher, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm so glad that you were able to see that Bright Blue stuff as well, which I personally found very, very interesting, not least the idea of how the benefit system can be steered very slightly more to the hard-pressed middle classes as well, rather than simply the poorest of the poor. Christopher Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. You may agree or disagree with what he had to say. Let us know at GBViews, at GBNews, or on our social media. I'm delighted to say now that joining me on the programme is Stephen Timms, MP, who is chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee and a former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, so he knows the numbers as well. Stephen, interesting, given what Christopher from the Institute of Economic Affairs was just saying, is that universal credit was a good and fairly fundamental reform. It's not perfect. The rollout was bodged. Why have Labour said that it will not be revisited? You're kind of almost nodding it through now and focusing more on the benefit system as it helps people who want to get back into work to get back into work. Doesn't universal credit need a closer look as well?
Well, there are some changes that are needed to universal credit. I agree with Christopher. In principle, it was a very sensible idea, merging different benefits into one. The rollout didn't go well, but it's pretty much in place now. It'll actually take until 2028 on current projections to complete the rollout, but it's pretty much there. And actually, in the pandemic, the universal credit computer system did a very good job. It took on loads of people. I think there were 100,000 people applied in one day at the start of the pandemic. The system coped very well with that. So I think what we now need to do is to use that system. It's in place, fix some of the problems with it, and improve it for the future. The biggest problem in universal credit, in my view, is that once you've applied for it, you have to wait 5 weeks before you get your first regular benefit payment. And that means that people get into debt to the DWP. They have to take an advance, which they have to repay. And that doesn't work well. That needs resolving. But the fundamental system, I think, is perfectly sensible, and one that we can use and build on.
All right. I want to ask you the macro question, as it were, which I did with Christopher as well. And that is that you lived through that era, and I remember it very well as also of Tony Blair saying to Frank Field and others, I want you to think the unthinkable about welfare reform. And possibly now, if we read the leader of your party in the Sunday Telegraph this morning, even about the NHS. Sir Keir said, nothing's off the table, the agenda is fulsome. Do you also, Stephen, believe that we are entering a period of fairly profound thought about what we need welfare for, how it works, what its objectives are, and even, as Wes Streeting, your friend and colleague, has said, even the NHS Is it still fit for purpose? If it was set up as it is today, way back when, it simply, as Keir says, would not have survived.
I think we do need some fresh thinking. Christopher made the point about the huge number of people who are depending on food banks at the moment. That shouldn't be happening. We need to look again at how Social Security is supporting people, because it does need to be enough to lift people above the level where they need to go to a food bank. The discussion we've had in the last week with Jonathan Ashworth's contribution, which I welcome, he suggested that people who are out of work for health reasons, who start a job, that if the job doesn't work out, they should be able to go straight back onto their sickness benefits without having to go through that cumbersome assessment all over again. And that's a helpful idea, I think, because for quite a lot of people who are out of work at the moment, the fear is that if they started a job and it didn't work out, they'd then be off their benefits as well. So if people can be reassured about that, it will encourage people to take a bit of a risk, step out into a job, see how it goes. Hopefully it'll work out. There was a report in the Times this week suggesting that ministers are looking at the idea that people who are out of work on health grounds could actually keep their benefits once they start a job, again, to encourage people to move forward and into a job. We do have a growing number of people who are out of work on health grounds. That's partly to do with COVID. It's mental health is a big part of the problem as well. And yet we know that for people with mental health problems, very often being in a job can be a big contribution towards improving their mental health. So we've got to look at how we support people into work, which can be benefit from everybody's point of view. And one particular point I want to make, Alastair, is apart from the benefit issues, which are very important, we also need to look at how we organise employment support. If you're going to help people who are out of work, perhaps because of a mental health problem, into work, you need the job centre, maybe a local college, and the NHS to be working together to provide the support that's needed. You cannot organise that from Whitehall. It needs to be much more localised than that. We need to devolve the responsibility for employment support into local areas, perhaps the new integrated care service areas that have been defined in the NHS, so that the support can be organised locally to provide the help that people need. This is something the Select Committee has looked at, and we've come forward with that proposal as a way forward. And alongside the benefit issues, how we organise employment support is a really important part of reform as well.
Stephen, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. So as Damien Green said on the programme a couple of weeks ago, health and care, but also now health, care and welfare as well. Perhaps some joined-up thinking in that territory. My enormous thanks to Stephen Timms, there, Chair of the Select Committee and former Chief Secretary of the Treasury, and also to Mr Snowden from the Institute of Economic Affairs. So those are their thoughts. You may agree with them, you may disagree with them. I thought there was really interesting stuff from all of those guests. Let us know what you think as well. Did they miss anything out? Do you particularly agree or disagree with anything that they said? GBNews at gbnews.uk or on our social media or my social media. Just get in touch and we will share the best thoughts as the programme unfolds. As I say, that was Stephen Timms, Chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, former Chief Secretary to the Treasury. We've plenty more to come this afternoon, not only on that subject, but on a wide range of other ones as well, here on Alastair Stewart and Friends. It is National Pothole Day. Drivers are being warned to expect a surge in potholes due to the large amount of rain that fell either side of December's freezing temperatures. GB News' East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has that remarkable story. But first, we're going to take a quick break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's 1:34. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. Police have urged witnesses to come forward after 6 people were shot in a drive-by shooting in North London yesterday. A 7-year-old girl remains in hospital in a stable but life-threatening condition. 4 women and a 12-year-old girl were treated in hospital, with a 48-year-old suffering life-changing injuries. The suspects are believed to have used a shotgun outside a funeral in Euston. Superintendent Jack Rowlands described the incident as shocking.
We believe the suspects discharged a shotgun from a moving vehicle, which was a black Toyota CHR. We want to hear from anyone who witnessed the incident or has information about it.
At least 68 people have died following a plane crash in Nepal, the country's worst aviation disaster in 30 years. The aviation authority says 72 people were on board the Yeti Airlines flight, which crashed in Pokhara during clear skies. Those on board included passengers from India, Ireland, Australia and France. And an airport spokesperson has just announced that the search will resume tomorrow for the remaining 4 people. The Health Secretary has criticised the GMB union over what he calls a lack of patient and public safety during recent ambulance strikes. Steve Barclay wrote to the union saying voluntary arrangements which were put in place were not enough. It comes as anti-strike legislation is due to be debated by MPs tomorrow. Last week, the GMB published an open letter saying ambulance staff felt demonised by the government. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back now to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. Hello and welcome. You're watching Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio and, of course, online. And thank you very much indeed for so doing. Now, money to deal with the blight of potholes has become something of a regular feature in national budgets. During that speech, when the Chancellor of the Exchequer stands there and unveils all manner of things, potholes have kind of snuck in, and their costs and dangers to motorists are very evident indeed. But local authorities who have to try and sort it all out, and motoring organisations make the point that, of course, such is the scale of the problem that it's never enough. And it's a little bit like painting the Forth Bridge. You make a start and then you've just got to start all over again. Well, hardly surprisingly, it is National Pothole Day. And after the coldest start to winter in more than a decade, the recent rain has created the perfect recipe for crumbling roads as the moisture sinks into the cracks that the cold have created. Oh, and it all ends in disasters. The RAC says that they've had 20 pothole-related call-outs between October and December last year, and they're warning that road users on 4 wheels and 2 should expect even more of them. They also do damage to tyres and wheels and cars as well. More of it, alas, is on the way. We'll be talking about the weather a little bit later on in the programme. But one particularly bad stretch of roadway with this particular difficulty is on the A5 in Northamptonshire, and it caught the attention of Britain's leading pothole campaigner, aptly named Mr. Pothole. So we sent Will Hollis to meet up and have a look.
The dreaded pothole, scourge of Britain's streets. Like heads on a hydra, patch one up, another two appear. On National Pothole Day, Mr. Pothole himself, aka Mark, a campaigner, is en route to a stretch of the A5 between Towcester and Milton Keynes that's got his attention.
Potholes on the A5 that weren't necessarily that bad in depth, but it's the large area of loss of the wearing surface that affects your braking and handling, and also the fact that people were damaging their tyres.
Potholes form when heavy traffic breaks up the road. Water fills the cracks, then freezes, causing more damage. Brits report millions of them to councils and highway authorities every year. Mark isn't the only one worried about the A5. So is Ian, a local councillor.
As you can see, there's a pothole there. In fact, there's three there. There's one just about to form there and there.
Broken glass is strewn beside the potholes. Ian says crashes are common here.
It is an undeniable fact that we've had fatal accidents on this road. Whether or not they're connected to potholes, I'm not going to speculate. But it is a fact that they're happening, and we need to try and make this road safer.
Nationally, Northamptonshire isn't the worst place for potholes. Figures from the AA show Northumberland tops the list. Cities like Glasgow and Liverpool are also very bad.
I'm quite sure that it's not unique, but nonetheless, it is one of the main strategic highways, and we have to look after those main arterial routes that are taking traffic to everybody across the country.
National Highways, which covers England, says it's been inspecting the stretch of the A5 near Towcester and is planning resurfacing for next month. In a statement, it added that, "We know that good quality roads are important to the millions of drivers that use our network each day. Safety is also our primary concern, and we set stringent standards for pothole repairs on our roads." On National Pothole Day, Mark says the government needs to rethink how it fixes roads.
The real answer is for government to invest £3 billion a year, every year, on a major annual resurfacing programme for local roads, give back the £400 million cut to road maintenance, and then by 10 years' time we won't be in the situation we are with our roads failing so many potholes.
National Pothole Day sounds like a celebration. It isn't. Blemishing the roads Brits rely on, the misery they cause is what's being remembered. Will Hollis for GB News in Towcester.
And Hampshire, if you're watching, Wood Lane. Whether you be Hampshire or anybody else, you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends, with plenty more still to come this afternoon, including more strikes to come from university lecturers as USU members plan walkouts in February and in March. Follows students already joining the student group claim to seek compensation over disruption to their education, which of course they now pay for during COVID and previous strikes. That's coming up next, but first we're going to take a quick break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News TV and radio. Nearly all UK universities are to face 18 days of strikes across February and March. That is according to the UCU. Now, as my old mate Charles Clarke, when he was president of the National Union of Students and was swayed to support as a Labour minister the idea of student fees, he said fees will make students more consumeristic in their thinking. They will be judging the quality of lectures, of tutorials, of libraries, of facilities, but of course they will have paid for it. First and foremost, it's got to be there for them to make that judgment. Many right now are objecting and want to take action over the withdrawal of those services, over the simple assertion that they will not be getting what they have paid for. Well, student group Claim are seeking compensation over disruption to their education during COVID and previous strikes. Solicitors are operating on a no-win, no-fee basis, arguing that the universities have breached contracts by failing to provide services. They've already sent letters of claim to 18 universities, with more than 60,000 students having joined in that claim. Joining me now to discuss it further is Shimon Goldwater, who is a solicitor with Assessons. They've, as I said in that lead-in, I mean, they clearly have paid for an expensive service which simply is not going to be available whilst so many in the teaching staff are on strike and not at work.
Yeah, that's right, Alastair. Thank you. So we're currently representing about 60,000 UK university students and international students who have been suffering now for years. I mean, this latest round of strikes is, I think, the third or fourth round in the last few years. And that's on top of all the disruption that students suffered during the pandemic. So the claims they are bringing to court, and the first hearing is in just 2 weeks' time, concern all of that disruption, which meant, as you said, that they paid for one thing and received something which was far less valuable. And that's what these claims are about.
What does that law actually say the rights of those students are, as we're watching, if people are listening to our conversation on television, a lecturer giving it plenty of that. But what are the rights under the law of those students?
So the claims are relatively simple. It is a simple breach of contract situation. So this is a case where students have paid tuition fees for services, lectures to be given in person, access to libraries and other campus facilities, and what they've been given during the pandemic and during strikes are poor quality substitutes. So teaching online only during the pandemic, closed libraries, during strike action, classes cancelled entirely. And when that happens, you're entitled to the difference between the value of what you paid for and the value of what you received, rather like someone who pays for a 5-star holiday and is told, we're fully booked, we'll give you a room at a 2-star hotel down the road. They'd expect to receive the difference in price between those two holidays. It's no different here with these students.
Pretty simple stuff. Absolutely fascinating. Shimon, thank you very much indeed for sharing it with us, with all the authority that you bring to it as a solicitor with Assassin's. And thank you very much indeed for your time this Sunday. That is Shimon Goldwater, solicitor, as I said, with Assassin's, who's working on this campaign as well. I'm delighted to say that joining me now also is Reem Ibrahim, who is a political commentator in his own right, and more importantly in the context of this conversation, is a university student. So you've joined in the claim. Now, that in my days as a student leader with Charles Clarke and people like that, we very often used to feel that student accommodation wasn't up to muster and we go on rent strike. We wouldn't pay the money. Your problem in this context is you paid for the lectures, you paid for the tutorials, you paid for the service, and we've just heard a top solicitor say you've got a slam dunk case.
Absolutely, Alastair. I think that's exactly it. We're paying for a service that we are just not being provided with. And I think that what's quite upsetting about this is actually the sort of turn that the University and College Union have taken. I've sort of publicly criticised the union for sort of not being able to represent teachers and lecturers, and they've sort of hit back at me on Twitter as well. So I think the fact that they are so incredibly aggressive towards students just shows that they are not on our side. They do not represent the people that actually matter in this situation. And I have every sympathy with those teachers, those professors, especially those junior research staff that actually have received a pay cut. But actually, we've all received a pay cut. We're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, and they are just absolutely hurting students the most.
How do you work out that key point that Shimon just made in my conversation, and that is that you've paid 6, 7, 8 grand a year, whatever it might be, for the course that you are pursuing, but you've only received, I don't know, 5% or 10% because of COVID and because of the strikes of what you'd paid for? Are the lawyers doing that for you and saying, right, you are entitled, we reckon, to 500 quid, 2 grand or whatever it might be? Who's doing that work?
I believe that because it's a class action case, sort of looking at it as a whole, but you're right, it's quite difficult to sort of look at that targetedly because every university sort of did things differently. A lot of my lecturers, some of my lecturers are part of a UCU union, some of them are not. So it meant that some of them did turn up to my lectures and a lot of them didn't. And also sort of during COVID, some of my lecturers just, recorded lectures at home via Zoom. Some of them just used the recordings from 2019. So, there's a lot of different variety around the way that these professors and lecturers and the junior research staff have sort of been able to use sort of the resources in front of them to be able to compensate for that. But when it comes to the strikes, I think that if a lecturer has not turned up to a lecture, then that means that we should be compensated for that individual lecture or class. I think the fact that they haven't, shown up at all just shows that we paid for something that we physically did not receive. And I think that what I would like to really emphasise is how much stress this has really caused a lot of students. I'm in my 3rd year of university now. I go to the London School of Economics. So, during my A-levels, I spent all of my time in the library studying really hard to get into this university. And then in my 1st year of university, it was characterised by lockdowns, successive lockdowns where we had to be taught online. I had to stay at home and be taught online in my room. And then my 2nd and 3rd year has been characterised by strikes. So my university experience has not been the same as it has been previously. And I'm paying £9,250 a year for it.
Yeah, a lot of money. And as I say, you've become more consumeristic, as Charles Clarke predicted, and quite right too. Reem Ibrahim, thank you very much indeed for fitting us into your busy weekend. 60,000, they reckon now, like Reem, are saying we're not getting what we paid for and we want our fay crack of the whip. And as the solicitor just said to us, they've got every chance of success. So if that affects you out there, whether you be a lecturer, whether you be an undergraduate or postgraduate, do let us know. GBviews at gbnews.co.uk or do it on social media. I think it's a lively issue and one that many people out there are clearly honked off about because they've parted with their big amount of money and simply not getting what they have paid for. Brits love to talk about the weather, don't we? But enough already, you might think, after the first few months of this year. It's been a long tale of wet, 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 wet for quite some time. But as that brilliant report on the Pothole, National Pothole Day demonstrated as well, it's not only wet, 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 but it's also wet, wet following cold, cold, cold and getting colder again, because the UK is now facing more than 100 flood warnings with cold and wet conditions set to continue well into next week. But how long will these conditions last for? There is one go-to man who I always delighted to welcome onto the programme, and that's Jim Dale, Senior Meteorologist at British Weather Services. Jim Dale. And there he is. Jim, I don't know if you were able to see, but earlier on there was a brilliant report on National Pothole Day, which just underlined that combination of all of this torrential rain and unusual precipitation coming off the back of those cold periods that you and I talked about when you were last on the programme is causing real havoc on the roads, and it's blooming dangerous. How long is it going to go on for?
Well, I mean, that recipe, you're right, the cold and then the rain. Particularly the rain, it undermines the surfaces, the road surfaces, and other things as well. So it occurred, and we're in now for another cold spell. You're showing pictures of the floods. Look, since we last talked, all of these floods, the Atlantic came in, the jet stream brought all of this wet weather. Perhaps it was overdue, given the very, very dry. A record-breaking summer, so in some instances it's probably welcomed. Not for those sitting in and around the flood zones of the country, mainly in the west of the country. But now we're about to change tack again. I'm just looking at the chart just above my head here, and we've got snow into the northern Highlands at this moment in time, and that's the footprint of the famous troll from Trondheim on his second return. So. It's going to be making its way down. That Arctic air is going to be making its way down south in the overnight.
Sure. And we've also had extraordinary pictures from California of just how bad flooding can get. I'm not saying that the pictures that we were showing there aren't bad, but let me add just one thing to it. From my neck of the woods down in Hampshire, Southern Water, they've got a real problem of the sewage system simply overflowing. And saying don't use the loo unless you absolutely have to, and they're getting terrible stick for pumping surplus into the natural waterways. I mean, the number of ways in which this impacts upon everyday life is phenomenal, and you are the expert on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the expert in terms of pumping sewage, to be frank with you. I know that's come a little bit of a political hot potato in the last year or so since the government allowed this to happen. I think previously it wasn't allowed to happen. I'm not sure. I mean, certainly, look, as far as rainfall is concerned, these last couple of months have delivered copious amounts of rainfall. We know that. And the bath can only be filled to the top and then it overflows. So there is some justification, but probably behind that there's some bad planning as well, because those water companies are fully aware that from time to time, and it is written on the can of climate change, that we will see in the winter period particularly excess rainfall. So
Jim, always a pleasure, as I said, and thanks for the book last time, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. So it's raincoats, woolly hats and scarves for just a little bit longer there. Jim Dale, Senior Meteorologist at British Weather Services, giving us his well-informed insights, and he's no expert on sewage. I just threw that in, which was an unfair question. Jim, thank you very much indeed. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends, including him, with lots more coming up on the programme this afternoon, including, will Boris Johnson's political comeback be scuppered by a televised testimony over Partygate? We'll be discussing that with some special guests and friends of mine in just a moment. Love to know what you think. Should he return to frontline politics? Can he return to frontline politics? Could his hopes be scuppered by going on telly? Boris being hurt by going on telly? Gracious me, surprise, surprise. Keep your thoughts coming in. I'll share the best with you as the programme develops and progresses. So you are watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio and online.
Hello, very good day to you. As we go through the rest of this Sunday, and well, it is going to be cold, but there will be some winter sunshine around, albeit with some rain, sleet and snow showers coming through too. The reason for the cold weather is because of this area of low pressure. The position of this out towards the east of the UK means we are dragging our air in from the north, and that's a cold direction, and so that's why temperatures really are dropping compared to recent days. Taking a closer look through the rest of the afternoon, and you can see there's some showery rain across parts of Wales, into England and also across northern Northern Ireland, this turning to snow over the higher ground as we go through the day. Also plenty of showers feeding in from the north across Scotland, these readily falling as snow, even perhaps to lower levels. Temperatures are much lower than we've seen through some recent days. Most places will struggle just in the single figures, and it is going to feel cold, especially when you factor in the brisk winds, though those will ease through the day. As we go through the evening, continue to see some rain, sleet and snow across parts of Northern Ireland and into Northern England and Wales. Also notice a spell of more persistent rain and some strong winds affecting southern counties. As we go through the night, could see some snow in the southeast as we head towards dawn. Temperatures are going to be very low tonight. Even in the south, we're going to see temperatures falling below freezing. Could get into negative double figures across the north, particularly where we have any lying snow. The rain and snow in the southeast should clear away as we go through Monday morning, and so a drying picture here. Otherwise then, for many, it is actually going to be a largely dry day with plenty of sunshine. Showers, though, still feeding in on that northerly wind. Could see some showers around East Anglia, but it's across Scotland where we're going to readily see some snow showers through the day. And temperatures even lower than today, so many places struggling in the mid-single figures, feeling pretty chilly indeed. As we go through the end of the day, though, on Monday, most places staying dry. A cold night to come, probably even colder than this coming night, and the snow showers will continue across Scotland, as that's why there's going to be a continuing snow and ice risk with a warning out all the way until Wednesday. That's because the showers continue as we go through the rest of the week, and it is going to stay cold at least until Friday perhaps.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere. Amazing! You see, amazing! You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel. Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful. Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello and welcome if you've just joined us. I'm Alastair Stewart and we are into our second hour. Thank you very much indeed if you've been with us since noon. Second hour of Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio, keeping you company with all of the news that matters up and down the country. Our next subject, I'm delighted to say, will be whether or not Boris Johnson's political comeback hopes and those of his good friends may be scuppered by a televised testimony over Partygate. But first, before that conversation, let's bring you right up to date with all of the day's news, and there's a lot happening out there. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alastair. 1 minute past 2, here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Police have urged witnesses to come forward after 6 people were shot in a drive-by shooting in North London yesterday. The 7-year-old girl remains in hospital in a stable but life-threatening condition. 4 women and a 12-year-old girl were treated in hospital, with a 48-year-old suffering life-changing injuries. The suspects are believed to have used a shotgun outside a funeral in Euston. The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, who's MP for the constituency, says his thoughts are with the victims. Superintendent Jack Rowlands has described the incident as shocking.
We believe the suspects discharged a shotgun from a moving vehicle, which was a black Toyota CHR. We want to hear from anyone who witnessed the incident or has information about it.
At least 68 people have died following a plane crash in Nepal, the country's worst aviation disaster in 30 years. 72 people were on board the Yeti Airlines flight, which crashed in Pokhara during clear skies. Those on board included passengers from India, Ireland, Australia and France. The search for the remaining 4 passengers has been halted until Monday. The Health Secretary has criticised the GMB union over what he calls a lack of patient and public safety during recent ambulance strikes. Steve Barclay wrote to the union saying voluntary arrangements which were put in place were not enough. He wants minimum service levels to be set in law. It comes as anti-strike legislation is due to be debated by MPs tomorrow. Last week, the GMB published an open letter saying that ambulance staff felt demonised by the government. Staying with NHS, then Sir Keir Starmer is calling for an overhaul, saying it must reform or it will die. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he says a future Labour government would turn GPs into direct NHS employees rather than allowing them to run their own practices. He's also announced plans to allow some patients, such as those with back pain, to self-refer to specialists.
We'll double the number of medical students using money from abolishing the non-dom status for the super rich. But also we need to look at the way GPs operate and see whether we can't make changes there. Things which will actually preserve the NHS going forward. The moment what the government's doing is really just presiding over managed decline, and that I will not accept. Of course there will be, challenges whenever you reform something, but frankly, if you don't reform the NHS, then I fear it will die.
The Prime Minister is asking government ministers to help persuade global allies to give more support to Ukraine and help break the stalemate with Russia. It comes after Rishi Sunak announced that the UK would be sending 14 tanks to Kyiv. With the first anniversary of the war approaching, Mr Sunak is stressing the need for an international strategy. Former Major General Chip Chapman was head of counter-terrorism at the MOD. He told us Russia won't back down.
So it's really this shift in the red lines, which will probably lead to other countries in the next 2 weeks also giving armour to the Ukrainians, which gives them this idea of a winning faster strategy in 2023. But of course, the enemy on the other side gets a vote in that, and it looks like the Russians are going to mobilise another 500,000 men this year on top of the 300,000 they mobilised in October. So there's a lot of hard fighting to come yet.
Well, over the last 24 hours, Russia has launched a major missile attack on Ukraine, striking vital energy facilities across the country and destroying an apartment building. Officials say at least 21 people have been killed, 40 are still unaccounted for. Ukrainian authorities say the coming days will be difficult with threats to the supply of electricity, water and heating during the height of winter. Well, here, the UK is facing more than 100 flood warnings, with cold and wet conditions set to continue well into next week. The Environment Agency had issued 192 flood alerts, whilst yellow warnings for ice are in place for much of Scotland and the northwest and the northeast of England. The Met Office is warning that a few centimetres of snow are also likely at low levels. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair.
Ray, thanks very much indeed. We touched on my next story yesterday. Is Boris Johnson poised for a comeback? His friends and financial backers certainly seem to think it might be the case. Or have his plans be foiled by his impending Partygate hearing before the Privileges Committee of the House of Commons, which the broadcasters have now embraced with glee. Sky and others talking about wall-to-wall coverage. The BBC, of course, saying that they will judge it by news values, which could make it all quite interesting. Well, joining me live in the studio, I'm delighted to say, is Aubrey Allegretti, who is the political correspondent for The Guardian, and he got the story first. It's all over the newspapers again today, and also sitting next to him is my old friend Dennis McShane, former Minister of State for Europe and Labour MP for Rotherham, who I've discussed Boris Johnson and what Labour really thinks of him on several occasions in the past. Won't Boris Johnson just bat away the attacks that will be forthcoming at this committee?
I think we're going to see a spectacle the likes of which we've never seen before. Boris Johnson obviously is very good at wriggling out of scrutiny. We've seen him before things like the liaison committee. But here he's probably going to be presented with written evidence and potentially some...
Under lock and key, we read in the paper at the moment.
Yes, it is for the moment. But there will probably be some other witnesses who are called. They could be cleaners, police officers, people who worked in Downing Street, who might dispute his version of events. And obviously what we're trying to stress here is the Privileges Committee is not investigating, you know, what karaoke machine was taken to what party or who got drunk where. It's about, did Boris Johnson knowingly deny that there were COVID parties when they had obviously taken place?
From what you read, and you know these people, have Labour got the firepower on that committee to nail a big beast like Boris Johnson, even if they've got other people coming forward saying, I saw him do this, I saw him do that, and what have you? Is that committee powerful enough?
I'm not sure. The people on it who are the real power brokers, very independent men like Albert Costa, Bernard Jenkin, who we've known, you know, all my political life, they are Charles Walker. They are not going to be cowed. They will be thinking, what is in the best interest of the Conservative Party? Now, anybody can dream of making a comeback. I mean, maybe, I'm sure Jeremy Corbyn wakes up now and then saying he'll come back. Donald Trump certainly does. You had Michael Portillo on not so long ago. He'd love to make a comeback. But in the end, my friends are older. They're not, you know, politically ambitious anymore. I say to them all the time, Victoria, I was with a bunch of them last week. Boris Johnson coming back? You must be joking. Because he is the gift that Keir Starmer would dream to have Boris Johnson back, creating havoc in the Conservative Party.
Well, I think one of the times we discussed this, one of your very elegant arguments was that, in fact, that as long as Boris Johnson was there, it was great news for Labour because he was such an open-door target.
I think that's right. I mean, he thinks he won the 2019 election because of Brexit and his giant personality. I canvassed every red wall seat in 2019. Brexit was hardly mentioned. Johnson was hardly mentioned. They loathed the idea of Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister, and Labour was so stupid after the defeat of 2017 to again re-offer Jeremy Corbyn. But Jeremy's now completely out of the picture. So I think it's a bit of a myth. Plus these scandals in the Sunday Times today about Johnson having an £800 million credit line from some holiday camp or camping owner in Canada. Other stuff that's come in, which is, you know, the guy who used to bankroll Nigel Farage's Brexit party now wants to put money behind Johnson. Why? Because he wants to refight 2016 all over again. And my sense is, again on that, and, you know, I'm a Brexit anorak more than anybody else, Alastair, is nobody wants to go back to the Brexit wars. We've got a huge problem of how we solve and ameliorate the situation. Mr. Starmer, Sir Keir is being very, very tough. Rishi Sunak's saying the same language. Yep. So the idea that Boris is going to come bring Brexit back to life and relaunch a new wave of anti-European hate to please Nigel Farage and one or two other people, I think is just daft. I mean, he's had his time. It's not bad. 3 years in number 10. I mean, it's a bit better than Liz Truss, about the same as Theresa May, maybe not quite as good. Not bad as a record. Go away, make your money, enjoy your children, enjoy being a grandparent, and just, frankly, Boris, you're 60 and next year, I think, grow up.
Aubrey, what do you make of that, particularly the crucial point at the very beginning of Dennis's analysis, and that is that the real dangers for Boris Johnson are not so much Harriet Harman sitting in the chair because Chris Bryan recused himself because he'd said what he'd said about Boris Johnson, but Charles Walker, Standards Committee man, moral high ground in Parliament, and enormously well thought of across the Conservative Party. Is that where the real danger lies for Boris Johnson?
Absolutely. They're all independently minded. In Charles Walker's case, he's announced he's standing down at the next election. They have very little skin in the game. When you speak to Conservative MPs privately, they sort of go, oh, which one could we lean on? And when you sort of give them the list of names, they realise that actually these are not people who are going to be easily swayed, and therefore it'll be much more difficult to influence the outcome. Obviously, what they're also planning to do is publish quite a lot of evidence that they uncover during the course of their investigation. This has been going on for 5 or 6 months already. They've been doing their homework. So there's potential for us to see things like photographs, more WhatsApps or texts, other incriminating things that might help sway Conservative MPs when it comes to that key vote in the House of Commons.
And the other crucial bit, it's slightly techie, but it's a fact. Catherine Forster and I were talking about it yesterday. As I said, we touched upon it yesterday. This committee and the whole House of Commons have the ability to punish him as the Member of Parliament for Uxbridge. They also have the power to dent his ambitions in finding a safer seat, which the Prime Minister deny he is in pursuit of. Sunak says he will stand in Uxbridge. Johnson's people say, oh, he's looking for a safer seat because Uxbridge is a little bit marginal. This committee has real power, but the floor of the House of Commons has absolute power.
I think that's absolutely right. So when the committee sort of presents its findings, all it can do is recommend a sanction, and it will then be up to the whole House of Commons whether or not to try and amend it, to make it sort of potentially smaller if they think he's being too hard done by, or accept it. We might see a repeat of the kind of Owen Paterson scandal where the whips decide to get involved and start trying to tell MPs to vote one way or the other. Unlikely we'll get there. But yes, there are big high stakes for Boris Johnson. It's rumoured that he's on chicken run. I mean, I've heard that he could be looking somewhere in Oxfordshire, like Henley, his old seat. In the north, he might want to sort of become this kind of king of the red wall to try and cement this kind of idealised expectation of himself that I think he thinks everybody else sees of him. So it potentially puts a real dent in that at a very key point when, in the run-up to the local elections in May, that's the prime time for him to challenge Rishi Sunak again.
Fascinating stuff, and congratulations on getting the scoop in the first place. As I say, everybody in the Sunday papers has now followed you. Dennis, thank you for reflecting upon previous conversations of these matters and reminding me of, yes, my very good friend Charles Walker, who is an excellent fisherman, apart from being an excellent Member of Parliament. Good to see both of you, and thank you very much indeed. I'm equally delighted to say that another old friend of mine is joining in the conversation now, and that is Edwina Currie, who is former Conservative Member of Parliament herself and a former health minister too. Now, as early as last year, you were still somewhat warm towards Boris Johnson. Your position, if I characterise it correctly now, is that he shouldn't seek to return to the front line of politics, but he should jolly well seek to return to the front line of campaigning on behalf of the Conservative Party as we get closer to what is looking like an increasingly interesting general election. Edwina, have I got it about right?
Oh, you have. You put your finger on it. Incidentally, Alastair, a bit less of the old friend, more of the long-standing friend, perhaps. Yes, I mean, Boris is a great campaigner. And in fact, the first couple of years that he was Prime Minister, I thought he did a cracking good job, particularly both with COVID and with completing Brexit. There's a bit of tidying up to do still, obviously. But we did very well coming out of COVID. We did well with the vaccine programme. And a great deal of that is down to his leadership. But we have moved on. And the last thing that we need right now as a country is yet another change of Prime Minister. I mean, you've mentioned Rishi Sunak almost in passing. I think we've got an exceptionally good government right now. And the fact that it's calm and quiet and that detailed decisions are being taken and legislation is coming to the House of Commons in an orderly fashion is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And I'm quite sure that by the time we get to the general election in 2024, people will see that actually Rishi is a remarkable leader. So what Boris should be doing is trying to ensure that we get to that general election in jolly good shape. And that he needs to put his campaigning talents to use right through the whole country. The comeback sounds like it means two different things, Alastair.
Yeah.
It sounds like it means trying to find himself a better seat. And the one next door to us in Derbyshire Dales is being touted. I think he would hate it. It doesn't have even a railway station, let alone the kind of quality of activity that it has, you know, in North London or somewhere. It's very. He's going to get to know an awful lot of sheep if he wants to come up here.
Which used to be Michael Heseltine's stamping ground, if I remember rightly. I'm desperate to see you pop up on the screen live because I wanted to put to you what I thought was the brilliantly perceptive point that Dennis McShane made at the beginning of this conversation. And that is that for Boris Johnson, the real danger within those hearings that, as Aubrey broke in The Guardian a few days ago, are now going to be televised probably wall-to-wall on some stations, slightly more selectively by the BBC and the Parliament channel. The real dangers for Boris Johnson are people like Charles Walker, very experienced, very clever, clean-hand Tories who actually underline exactly what you've just said. We've moved on. Please, can we get on with the job and win an election which is in no way in the bag yet?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's a majority of Conservatives on that committee because it reflects the strength of the parties in the House. But it will, I'm pretty sure, come up with a unanimous report. It's reporting on whether privilege has been abused. When an MP speaks, as you know, in the House of Commons, you're protected by privilege, so you can say almost anything. But that is a very precious privilege. And it is protected by, well, did you lie? Did you deliberately mislead the House and then make no attempt to put that right at the first opportunity? So that is going to be what that hinges on. The fact it's televised, it's always televised. The cameras are there all the time. The amount of attention is going to be paid, because it's a former Prime Minister, is going to be kind of off the wall. But my own feeling is that's done and dusted. I mean, my goodness, it was April last year when the House of Commons decided that this whole procedure is going to be called in. And by the time we actually get any decision, it'll be April this year, probably. We have moved on. You know, we've tried different prime ministers since, and now we've got an exceptional one in Rishi Sunak and a very, very good government. And I want Boris to concentrate, please, Boris, on that.
Going to give you the chance to be equally complimentary about her, because she was very complimentary about what you said about Charles Walker and others. She does raise a really quite interesting point there, profoundly important, because I was involved in the very first televising of the House of Lords and of the House of Commons, with Jack Wetherall as the Speaker then, who was incredibly helpful. And he said, yes, the people have the right to see how their democratic business is conducted, but within sensible, grown-up rules. This is not circus, this is not spectacle. Edwina's absolutely right. There's a danger here. This could simply become spectacle. That's why they want wall-to-wall coverage.
Well, they've been working for sort of 6 or 7 months very, very quietly on this. The televised hearings are only expected to last between, say, 1 and 3 weeks, and I think we'll get about 3 days per week of hearings. I think the suggestion that it's done and dusted isn't quite accurate, because the Prime Minister still disputes that he misled Parliament or that he lied. If he accepted that, then it would be done and dusted. But he hasn't faced any kind of scrutiny or investigation yet into whether specifically he misled Parliament. This isn't about what happened when, it's about who knew what when. That hasn't been investigated yet. There's a reason it's taken quite a long time. It was to do with the death of the Queen, all parliamentary business being sort of suspended for some time, difficulty replacing an absent member on the committee, and then difficulty kind of getting documents from the government. I revealed earlier this week that Liz Truss's government was not handing over some of the documents that were requested back in July. They got them in November. That's part of the reason it's taken so long.
And which is why it does need to be extensive coverage, in your view.
Well, I think it would shine a light. You know, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and it will mean that this is done and dusted once and for all.
Not completely. I mean, I hope Aubrey's right, and congratulations on his superb journalism. But the plain fact is, all these big build-ups to parliamentary hearings, or indeed in any country, Senate hearings at time in the States, often fade away, because the one thing about Boris Johnson is he is an inveterate liar. That's not my language. That's the language of the French ambassador to London at the time he was Prime Minister. but he is the most slippery, greased piglet who can slip out of
Not
anything.
your words either. I think David Cameron's.
I think it was David Cameron's phrase. I'm not going into Tory pain. But I think this will just be embarrassing for the Conservative Party. I don't quite fully accept dear Edwina's designation of Rishi Sunak as the new Gladstone, the new Churchill. I don't think there's a lot there. He's well-mannered, he's Wycomist, he's Oxford, he's the richest man in England, but that's it.
All right, well, let me freeze that thought and people heard what Edwina said there, and in the last couple of minutes that we've got, and do feel free to join in, although you're not a former MP. I've got two brilliant friends of mine who are former MPs to it. Sunak said of the crisis in the NHS that he wanted bold and radical thinking. He's cut more deals with the private sector. He's cut a deal with the care homes, and we discussed that at great length on the programme yesterday. And you've got Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, echoing what Alan Milburn told me years ago, that the relationship between Labour and the private sector of health and care is not a one-night stand. And Starmer himself saying this very day in the Telegraph, it's got to reform if it's to survive. Edwina, are we entering, under Sir Keir and under Rishi, a potentially much more interesting election on things like welfare and health than we thought we might be just a few months ago? Do you reckon it's going to be fairly fundamental and pretty profound stuff?
Oh.
We've lost the link to Edwina there. If we can get it back, I will do that, because I genuinely want to hear, as I'm sure you do, what her answer is. You've been through this, and I said to the brilliant Stephen Timms earlier, we all lived through, well before your time, but Tony Blair saying to lovely old Frank Field, think the unthinkable on welfare reform, think the unthinkable almost on the health service, and Frank did, and Tony didn't like it. Are we getting a little close to a period like that, with John Ashwood saying what he did and Keir writing what he did in the Telegraph today, that on big-ticket items like the welfare state, on disability benefits, like the NHS itself, that we're going to have a really profound thinking general election within 12, 18 months?
I personally don't sense that. The big thinking in government doesn't happen in election manifestos or election debates. It happens when forceful circumstances and the broader public opinion is ready for a change. Now, the biggest thing Tony did to the NHS in his last term of office was to absolutely drown it in money. So by the time the Tories came in 2010, we had a really good NHS, and they've gradually just whittled it down. I think this election will simply be, do we want more Conservative years? Do we want a Prime Minister who's intellectually clearly very able, but he's like a dormouse. He just doesn't say anything. He squeaks. He's not a leader. He's not a speaker. Or do we want honest Sir Keir Starmer in a Labour team? That said, here's a stat to bear in mind, Alastair, if I may. 1997, when we had the Labour landslide, the Tories had 66 seats more than we did. Today, the Tories have 163 more seats. So becoming Prime Minister is not like climbing Mont Blanc or Everest. It's like climbing 100 or 200 Munros in Scotland.
Still tricky.
And it's much, much harder. I keep begging my Labour friends, the polls look great at the moment, please, I've been there more than once before. It's going to get a lot harder, and there needs to be a lot more imagination and inspiration from Labour.
Do you anticipate, as a political correspondent, that it's going to be intellectually and politically perhaps more exciting than many of us in the trade thought as recently as 6-9 months ago?
I mean, I hope so. I've obviously covered...
Do you think so?
Well, I've covered 3 general election campaigns, and every time from Labour, the argument is, this is kind of do or die for the NHS. If you don't vote for us, you know, it's going to sort of perish under the Conservatives. And there's obviously a risk that every time they say that and people carry on using the NHS, albeit that the services potentially get worse, the wait times get longer, that doesn't happen. Now, of course, post-COVID, it does feel more like it's at breaking point than ever before. And so I think it's quite sensible that Keir Starmer acknowledges that. Conservative MPs are quite rattled by the shadow health secretary West
very much so.
His suggestions.
And we're
about...
streeting by name, and John Ashworth by name, and Bridget Phillipson worth reading this morning on childcare. It's in play, as I said yesterday, and as we've repeated again today. Aubrey Allegretti, well done on your scoop, and great to see you as always. Dennis, my lovely friend, thank you very much indeed. Look after yourself, and you're always welcome. My apologies if she's still listening. We can't hear her, alas, but my huge thanks to Edwina Curry, long-standing friend, as she insists upon my saying, not old friend, quite right too. Let's have some courtesy, Stuart, for joining that conversation as well. And we are finding time before we go off air to share back some of your best thoughts, reflecting upon what all of my excellent guests have had to say so far today. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart, a wonderful array of friends today, with lots more still to come on the programme in what remains of our second and final hour. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Hello, very good day to you. As we go through the rest of this Sunday, and while it is going to be cold, but there will be some winter sunshine around, albeit with some rain, sleet and snow showers coming through too. The reason for the cold weather is because of this area of low pressure. The position of this out towards the east of the UK means we are dragging our air in from the north, and that's a cold direction, and so that's why temperatures really are dropping compared to recent days. Taking a closer look through the rest of the afternoon, and you can see there's some showery rain across parts of Wales, into England, and also across Northern Ireland, this turning to snow over the higher ground as we go through the day. Also plenty of showers feeding in from the north across Scotland, these readily falling as snow, even perhaps to lower levels. Temperatures are much lower than we've seen through some recent days. Most places will struggle just in the single figures, and it is going to feel cold, especially when you factor in the brisk winds, though those will ease through the day. As we go through the evening, continue to see some rain, sleet and snow across parts of Northern Ireland and into Northern England and Wales. Also notice a spell of more persistent rain and some strong winds affecting southern counties as we go through the night. Could see some snow in the southeast as we head towards dawn. Temperatures are going to be very low tonight. Even in the south, we're going to see temperatures falling below freezing. Could get into negative double figures across the north, particularly where we have any lying snow. The rain and snow in the southeast should clear away as we go through Monday morning, and so a drying picture here. Otherwise then, for many, it is actually going to be a largely dry day with plenty of sunshine. Showers, though, still feeding in on that northerly wind. Could see some showers around East Anglia, but it's across Scotland where we're going to readily see some snow showers through the day. And temperatures even lower than today, so many places struggling in the mid-single figures, feeling pretty chilly indeed. As we go through the end of the day, though, on Monday, most places staying dry. A cold night to come, probably even colder than this coming night, and the snow showers will continue across Scotland, as that's why there's going to be a continuing snow and ice risk with a warning out all the way until Wednesday. That's because the showers continue as we go through the rest of the week, and it is going to stay cold at least until Friday perhaps.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deems & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview channel 236.
And YouView channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
(2:31). I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. A 7-year-old girl remains in a stable but life-threatening condition after a drive-by shooting in North London yesterday. Police have urged witnesses to come forward after 6 people were shot outside a funeral in Euston. 4 women and a 12-year-old girl also required hospital treatment, with one of the women suffering life-changing injuries. Superintendent Jack Rowlands says the suspects used a shotgun.
We believe the suspects discharged a shotgun from a moving vehicle, which was a black Toyota CHR. We want to hear from anyone who witnessed the incident or has information about it.
At least 68 people have died following a plane crash in Nepal, the country's worst aviation disaster in 30 years. 72 people were on board the Yeti Airlines flight, which crashed in Pokhara during clear skies. Those on board included passengers from India, Ireland, Australia and France. The search for the remaining 4 passengers has been halted due to darkness until tomorrow. The Health Secretary has criticised the GMB union over what he calls a lack of patient and public safety during recent ambulance strikes. Steve Barclay wrote to the union saying voluntary arrangements which were put in place were not enough. It comes as anti-strike legislation is due to be debated by MPs tomorrow. Last week, the GMB published an open letter saying ambulance staff felt demonised by the government. We're on TV, online and on DAB Plus Radio. This is the People's Channel, GB News. Back now to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thank you very much indeed. As was clear from the rest of this programme up to now, and indeed yesterday, and in Ray's bulletin there, we are in a busy and intriguing period in politics. About a week being a long time, but goodness gracious me, it is all happening. Reform is up there on the agenda, reform of the NHS, reform of the welfare state, also, very importantly, Brexit trade talks just around the corner, with a lot of hope, I think, rising perhaps on that front as well, with both the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister getting directly involved. Joining me live in the studio, I'm delighted to say, to unpack that and so much more, is somebody who is on top of all of it, and it is GB News political reporter Olivia Utley. Having a busy day. Gosh, you've had a busy morning and you're back this afternoon, I think, on your Todd as well. Away from all of that, apart from the reform bit, which I will come back to, is one specific thing. We were talking about the Privileges Committee and this big story about whether Boris will make a comeback at whatever level. And Dennis McShane, former Labour MP, and Edwina Currie, former Conservative MP, both said the real danger facing Boris is the detail and Charles Walker on that Privileges Committee.
Yes, we've known for a while that the Privileges Committee, which is something we've all slightly forgotten about since Boris Johnson left power, is still a big threat hanging over him. And Charles Walker, a Conservative MP who was a very adamant lockdown sceptic all the way through lockdown, very good on the detail, will grill Boris Johnson quite seriously. You've also got on that committee Chris Bryant, who does not pull his punches. He's
recused himself from the chair.
Yes.
With Harriet Harman, who's a sharp old lawyer.
Yes,
the chair.
Yes, and we've also got Laura Farris, another lawyer,
Yes.
Conservative MP, who is a very close ally of Rishi Sunak's on that committee too. Not that that should cloud her judgment, and I'm sure it wouldn't, but it's a pretty serious panel that he'll be
It's
facing.
about focus, isn't it?
Very focused.
Talking of focus, I know you've been doing some stuff on this and you talked about it a little bit earlier on. I was really knocked out by conversations that we had yesterday about NHS reform and about the stuff that Starmer has written himself in the Telegraph today about NHS reform. You know, the NHS has to reform to survive. Otherwise, it will be dead in the water. I mean, that is almost Sir Keir Starmer speaking a different language.
It's fascinating, this, because we saw a couple of weeks ago Wes Streeting, who is the Shadow Health Secretary, who is considered to be on the right of the Labour Party, coming out with this plan for the NHS, which essentially involved really quite serious reform, and he used language which we really haven't seen from a senior Labour politician for a long time, about not revering the NHS too much and not venerating it in this way that we do, like it's a sort of religion, because that makes it impossible to reform. And off the back of that, Keir Starmer was questioned quite a lot on what he made of Wes Streeting's remarks, and it was sort of felt in Westminster that Wes Streeting might have been I can't think of the word, but sort of ad-libbing a little bit and making up policy on the trot. But today, Keir Starmer has well and truly backed what Wes Streeting is saying. And he's got some very serious proposals for reform, including essentially preventing GPs becoming sort of the gatekeepers of the NHS, as they are. So under Labour's plans, someone with a serious back pain, for example, could refer themselves to a physiotherapist rather than having to go through the NHS. It also allows Labour to bang on again about not privatising the NHS because the GPs running their practices as little businesses is a kind of form of privatisation. But Wes Streeting on health, John Ashworth on welfare, particularly disability benefit, Bridget Phillimson this morning on child benefit could be even bigger than the NHS. These young thinkers are dragging him kicking and screaming into what could be a big reform election. Absolutely, it is sounding like a very big reform election. I went to Jonathan Ashworth's speech about welfare policy last week, and some of what he proposed was really quite radical. He's thinking of completely overturning the way that job centres work.
Smith's think tank.
Starting them again. Yes, at the CSJ.
Fascinating choice of venue.
Fascinating, absolutely. And, yeah, really radical proposals on basically ripping up job centres and starting again, changing the way the whole welfare process works, enabling people who've been on benefits to get into work and then back on benefits more easily. Sounds a bit technical, but it's actually pretty big reform. As for Bridget Phillimson, a name that, you know, we didn't really know a few months ago, her childcare reforms would be hugely radical. I mean, they're not costed yet, so let's not speak too soon. But we know that at the moment, you know, there's almost no free childcare at all for under fours, 30 hours a week between 3 and 4, nothing before that. She's suggesting that Labour would offer childcare for all parents between the ages of 0 and 11. Absolutely no idea how they could possibly afford that, but, you know, that would be a seismic change.
It just says, because Alastair Stewart and friends also, and family, because everybody who watches this knows my daughter's a former head teacher and a teacher. She went to an event where Bridget was the keynote speaker and said the thing that most impressed my daughter about Bridget was not the content of the main speech, it was the engagement with debate. And the willingness to take on the tough questions, exactly as you've just said, like costings and what have you. I mean, if we can have that kind of conversation and debate twixt now and the election, I think we'll have a great turnout.
Absolutely, and I did think the same actually about Jonathan Ashworth last week, who was, as you say, at the CSJ and very much keen to engage with everyone who was there. You know, Labour sometimes doesn't seem to be that close a friend of GBNews, but he was really keen to take my question and gave me a proper, fulsome answer. So I think this is going to be, as you say, quite a serious election, and there is no way the Conservatives can sit on their laurels, if they've got any laurels left.
Well, well, interestingly, because Edwina Currie was also saying, literally just a few moments ago, hurrah for Rishi Sunak, particularly on the NHS, where he said business as usual is no longer acceptable. It's got to be bold and radical, cuts more deals with the private sector, cuts a brand new deal with the care home sector, which is going to be really quite fundamental on bed blocking. So both Labour and the Tories have got the little thinking caps on.
Finally waking up, it feels like, after a long time of snoozing. So, yes, we should be on for quite an exciting general election.
Good hunting this afternoon. Wish you well. Lovely to see you, Olivia. Thank you very much indeed. Olivia Utley there, GB News political correspondent, with her insider wisdom on all of these matters. You too have your wisdom on these matters, and thank you very much indeed for getting in touch on our discussion on whether Boris Johnson can or should make a comeback. Brit says Boris should never have been removed. But now isn't time for another leadership challenge. 6 months of government time was lost due to the leadership crisis. The Tories need to focus on getting key legislation passed. Otherwise, they will simply deserve to lose in 2024. Well, there's an interesting thought. They've got a lot of thinking to do, as well as legislating twixt now and that election, I think. Stewart says Boris back? No, thank you. All right, short and sharp. Jen says, bring back Boris. Thank you very much, Dee. We like to have balance on this programme. Do keep your views coming in. And, of course, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News, and you will hear some terrific stuff there from our disability campaigner right at the beginning of the programme, the great Stephen Timms, Labour MP, and all of my guests today talking about reform of the welfare system that Olivia and I were just discussing, and yesterday's programme, which has got some terrific stuff on health service reform as well. So that's YouTube. We are at GB News. You have been watching today and yesterday Alastair Stewart and friends here at GB News TV and radio, and thank you very much indeed for so doing. We've a little more to go before I bid you farewell and adieu, including a visit to a school in North Lanarkshire that has created kindness lockers packed with food and warm clothes for struggling children. We're finding out a little bit more about that before we go off air. But before that, a quick break.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. You're watching Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News, TV and radio and online. We are inching towards the end of our second hour, but before that it is time for Sunday Savings. Rishi Sunak's pledge to defeat inflation has meant a return to high interest rates. That's the Bank of England's chosen tool to try and get inflation back to an agreed target which the government gives it. Now, there is news in several of the newspapers today saying that battle is being won to defeat inflation. It's beginning to slow down, and if it does, it may mean a reduction in interest rates at some stage. But in the meantime, it has meant a return to relatively high interest rates, clearly not as high as many of you will remember in the heady days of serious double-digit inflation days, but they're certainly higher than they were for an awfully long time when they were at those crazy, virtually zero levels. But markets are markets, and even in the market for loans, mortgages and the rest of it, competition sometimes kicks in, and there's growing evidence out there in that market that lenders are once again getting competitive, not only for first-time buyers, but also for many who are having to remortgage after being on a fixed deal for quite some time, of which there are many, many thousands. And I'm delighted to say, joining me now is one of the real experts in this territory, my old friend Ray Bolger, who is the senior mortgage manager at the mortgage brokers, John Charcoal, and there he is. What, in your view, sir, snapshot is going on out there in terms, first of all, of interest rates, and secondly, what competitors are up to try and tempt borrowers into their portfolio?
Well, I think the good news for borrowers is that we are continuing to see fixed rates come down. So after the Truss Kwarteng budget, when we saw mortgage rates up to into the sixes in many cases, we've now seen fixed rates come down, as low as about 4.25% for 5-year fixes if you've got a big deposit. But even if you've only got a small deposit, you can still get rates at about 5.25%, even with only a 5% amount of equity. So although we've seen a lot of bad news in terms of concern about rates rising, the news actually is getting better. So I think there is some good news on the horizon.
Changes that's happened over the years, and you and I have discussed this before, is post the 2006-07 crash, when the rules governing who could borrow and at what levels, and the assessments that were made of an individual's ability to keep those payments up. Is there any evidence at all of them getting any easier, or are the lenders still wanting to know every nook and cranny of your personal finances before they're prepared to meet you halfway on a big loan?
Yeah, well, lenders certainly still do want to know a lot of information, and that's understandable. They're lending you a lot of money, so it's important they do their due diligence and make sure that you can afford to repay. But because we have had these stricter requirements, anybody who's taken out a mortgage in the last 10 years will effectively have been stress tested by the lender for mortgage rates of at least 6.5%. So what that does mean is that with mortgage rates where they are now, they're still below the level at which people will have been stress tested. So I think the key issues for people who are coming to the end of a fixed rate deal is that their other living costs will have shot up. So it's not just the mortgage rate going up, it's all the other things going up, which won't necessarily have been taken into account. The other good thing is that back in 2008, before the last credit crisis, a lot of people did have variable rate mortgages. So when interest rates changed, they actually got affected straight away. Now, actually, then that was a good thing because bank rate came down, so mortgage rates came down. Now, nearly 80% of people are on a fixed rate. So that means that they know when their rates might change, so you can plan ahead.
Yeah.
And so that buys people some time to think about what they need to do.
Let me bolt together the first thing that you and I talked about and the thing that you've just said now, and that is what's happening with inflation and what the financial press is saying this morning, and what you said there about fixed rates and what have you. Are trackers, if you genuinely believe in your heart and your mind that that's the direction of interest rates, because that's also the direction of inflation, are trackers back on the agenda in your view?
Well, they certainly have come back on the agenda. And 2 or 3 months ago, I think there was a very strong case for taking out a tracker because fixed rates were still very high and bank rate hadn't gone to the level it is now. We've now got bank rate at 3.5%, almost certainly going to go up 1/4 or 1/2 point at the beginning of next month. And fixed rates have come down, so they're now actually as cheap or cheaper than trackers. So I think the time for a tracker is probably past, unless you want to take the view that you'll be able to get a cheaper fixed rate in a few months' time and would prefer to stay on the tracker short term. But we do find the majority of clients are really keen to know what their mortgage payments are going to be. It's probably their biggest monthly payment, although in some cases energy bills may be higher for some people now. So being able to budget for that large monthly payment is something a lot of people put a lot of value on. So I would say that don't dismiss trackers. The main benefit they've got is that many don't have early repayment charges. So if you're thinking of moving home in the next couple of years, that might be a reason why you want to take a tracker. But I do think fixed rates have now come down to a level where they're well worthwhile considering.
Very interesting advice and guidance, and my friend there, John, will be the first to say that there's a whole range of opinion available out there in the marketplace, and he is merely expressing his own view for you to reflect upon. But you can go online and seek what he has to say and the detail behind it. But I thought that all made very, very good sense. Final point, because we yesterday and today have been talking about big picture politics as well as the precise detail of things like mortgages and interest rates and inflation. There's a 2-page spread in the Sunday Times today showing the electoral advantage for the government, if it wants to stay in power, to crack the housing stock and the affordability of ownership of housing and the variations that exist right across the country. Do you think that penny has dropped? Because many mutual friends of ours have said there was nothing in Sunak's New Year speech about planning, about building homes, about the housing stock and the affordability of putting a roof over your head.
Well, there's nothing the government can do now that's going to have a big impact on housing availability before the next election. You know, with the long time frame it takes from planning to building, that's just not going to happen. I think what is interesting is that although we always talk about the need to build more houses, which everybody recognises, what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 months is several of the major house builders actually reducing housing starts because they're seeing a reduction in reservations. So at a time when perhaps one could start to build houses that weren't already pre-reserved, actually that's not happening. So that may be an area where the government could get involved. Perhaps the local authority or housing associations could think in terms of actually reserving some properties to allow the builders to keep building at the rate they were building 6 months ago, rather than cutting back starts, which obviously means we're going to have less housing completions later this year.
Yeah. Nothing is in the short term in the housing world. A great pleasure to talk to you again, John. Thank you very much indeed for finding time on what I know is your busy weekend. And do keep in touch with us. Thank you very much indeed. That's John Bulger there, who's the Senior Mortgage Manager at Mortgage Brokers, John Charcoal. As I say, lots of very interesting thoughts there about trackers, about fixed rates, about stress testing. It's all on his website. You can find it all and well worth reading always. Thank you very much indeed. Great to see you. Now, as I said just before beginning that fascinating conversation there with Ray, we have also time left in the programme. I'm thrilled to bits to say for one of my favourite slots. It is the Good Causes slot, where we champion British people who are doing good things across the country. And today, to be absolutely honest with you, is something that I had simply never heard of before. It is the notion of a kindness locker. And my guest to talk about it is Laura Steggles, who is a home economics teacher at Cumbernauld Academy up there in Scotland. And there she is. Brand new idea on me, brand new idea on you, or did you develop it, or did you hear it somewhere else? Did you see someone doing it and think, we'll have some of that?
So the way we came up with the kindness lockers, we had a visit to another local school. And they had a fabulous idea about a little shop of happiness where pupils could visit just to get the things that they need. So we developed it further for what would fit within our school, and we came up with the kindness lockers concept.
That's absolutely brilliant. We're looking at one of the lockers there with drinks and snacks and stuff like that. Who are the donors who are making this possible? I understand the idea of putting it safely in a locker, keeping an eye on it, and it's great to come back to when you need it. But who are the lovely donors that you're working with?
So our message is take it when you need it, give back when you can. So it is our school community, it is people in our community, local groups. We've got Cumbernauld and Kilsyth Care. We have a lot of input from teachers, a lot of input from parents that are donating just to support this. They all recognise that we all need a helping hand at some point. So it's just about making that available.
Yeah, absolutely. I said to the team when they told me you and I were going to be talking, I said, oh, a home economics teacher, absolutely brilliant. And I've talked about this before, home economics in the midst of a cost of living crisis, absolutely crucial. Are you flavour of the month with your Board of Governors and your head, or are you having to struggle for time and support?
We are very well supported within the school. We have a great department and we have great teachers. We love the subject and we really champion it. It's been a great department for years. We're very fortunate in that way, and I think the pupils love it as well.
I think it's a brilliant idea. Laura, well done on what you're doing with the lockers, and thanks through you to those lovely people who have made it possible by making their donations. And all the very best to everybody in Cumbernauld and in the home economics departments across the country. Great to talk to you and great to meet you. Thank you very much indeed, Laura Strigelsay. That is, I'm afraid, all that we have time for today. We will be back, however, on Saturday at midday next weekend. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day today, the rest of your weekend, and indeed all of your week. I'll see you next weekend. Bye for now.
Hello, very good day to you. As we go through the rest of this Sunday, and while it is going to be cold, but there will be some winter sunshine around, albeit with some rain, sleet and snow showers coming through too. The reason for the cold weather is because of this area of low pressure. The position of this out towards the east of the UK means we are dragging our air in from the north, and that's a cold direction, and so that's why temperatures really are dropping compared to recent days. Taking a closer look through the rest of the afternoon, and you can see there's some showery rain across parts of Wales, into England and also across Northern Ireland, this turning to snow over the higher ground as we go through the day. Also plenty of showers feeding in from the north across Scotland, these readily falling as snow, even perhaps to lower levels. Temperatures are much lower than we've seen through some recent days. Most places will struggle just in the single figures, and it is going to feel cold, especially when you factor in the brisk winds, though those will ease through the day. As we go through the evening, continue to see some rain, sleet and snow across parts of Northern Ireland and into Northern England and Wales. Also notice a spell of more persistent rain and some strong winds affecting southern counties. As we go through the night, could see some snow in the southeast as we head towards dawn. Temperatures are going to be very low tonight. Even in the south, we're going to see temperatures falling below freezing. Could get into negative double figures across the north, particularly where we have any lying snow. The rain and snow in the southeast should clear away as we go through Monday morning, and so a drying picture here. Otherwise then, for many, it is actually going to be a largely dry day with plenty of sunshine. Showers, though, still feeding in on that northerly wind. Could see some showers around East Anglia, but it's across Scotland where we're going to readily see some snow showers through the day. And temperatures even lower than today, so many places struggling in the mid-single figures, feeling pretty chilly indeed. As we go through the end of the day, though, on Monday, most places staying dry. A cold night to come, probably even colder than this coming night, and the snow showers will continue across Scotland, as that's why there's going to be a continuing snow and ice risk with a warning out all the way until Wednesday. That's because the showers continue as we go through the rest of the week, and it is going to stay cold at least until Friday perhaps.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on